train arrived just after midnight, when the station was almost empty and the air felt soft and still. A few yellow lights glowed above the platform, and the windows reflected the quiet night like calm little mirrors inside. Everything moved slowly. The doors closed with a gentle sigh. The seats were warm, and the hum of the engine felt more like a lullaby than a machine. Only a few passengers sat aboard, each wrapped in coats, scarves, and sleep-heavy thoughts. A woman near the window rested her head against the glass, watching the dark fields slide by. Now and then, a small light passed in the distance, a farmhouse, maybe a signal lamp, and vanished again into the night. The motion was smooth enough that she barely felt the train moving at all, as if the whole world had decided to slow down and breathe. This was Clara, a woman in her late 30s, her face carrying the weight of accumulated years and unspoken weariness. She had boarded the train seeking escape from a life that had grown too loud, too demanding, too full of voices that were not her own. In the next seat, an old man held a paper cup of tea in both hands. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply watched the moon float above the trees like a silent lantern, enjoying the way the steam curled upward and faded into nothing. Arthur, a retired schoolteacher who had spent his life shaping young minds, had boarded this train with no particular destination in mind. He was simply wandering, as he had been doing since his wife had passed 3 years ago, seeking places that held echoes of peace. At the far end of the carriage, a young boy had fallen asleep with his jacket half open and his shoes neatly placed beneath the seat. His mother tucked a blanket around his shoulders and smiled softly. She looked tired, but peaceful. There was comfort in the rhythm of the train, in the soft tapping of wheels over the rails. Maria had been traveling for 2 days with her son, Leo, returning to her hometown after a difficult divorce. The train had become their sanctuary, a moving cocoon where she could shield him from the world's harshness. Outside, the train passed through a small town where only a few windows were still lit. A bakery sign sat dark on the corner. A bicycle leaned against a brick wall. A curtain moved once, then stilled. It was the kind of town that felt deeply asleep, the kind of place where nothing needed to hurry, because morning would come in its own time. The train continued onward. The tracks curved beside a river, and for a while the water glided alongside the carriage, dark and smooth, catching only a little silver from the moon. Trees stood along the bank, tall and patient, their branches barely moving. It was a beauty that soothed the mind instead of waking it. A conductor walked through with footsteps so light they barely disturbed the air, checking tickets by flashlight. He nodded to each passenger and moved on without a word. When he reached Clara, she handed him her ticket, and he smiled in the kind of way that asked for nothing in return. His name was Samuel, and he had been working this route for 22 years. He had seen countless passengers pass through his carriage, lovers, mourners, dreamers, the lost and the found. He had learned to read the stories in their faces, to know when to speak, and when to simply be present. The boy stirred, then settled back into sleep, his breathing slow, and even now, matching the steady rhythm of the train. Maria let herself relax. She had been carrying the weight of a long day, but inside the warm light and endless black sky, that weight felt easier to hold. She watched her son's face, so innocent in sleep, and felt a surge of love so fierce it almost hurt. This was why she was traveling. She reminded herself for him, for the chance to start fresh, to build something new from the ruins of the past. The countryside opened wide now, fields lying under a silver mist, old fences drawing thin lines across the dark. In the distance, a windmill stood still, barely visible against the sky. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing called out. The world simply existed, serene and patient, while the train carried its passengers forward. Further along, a young woman turned the page of a book she had been reading for the last half hour, though the words had begun to blur together in the easiest, most pleasant way. What mattered more now was the feeling of being wrapped inside a moving night, surrounded by quiet strangers, traveling through the sleeping world together. Alina, a graduate student on her way to a research fellowship, had been so consumed by her studies that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be. The train was reminding her. She looked up and saw her own reflection in the glass, the inside of the train and the darkness beyond it, resting on top of each other. She felt that gentle, drifting feeling that comes when the body is awake, but the mind is ready to rest. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to stop thinking, to stop planning, to stop analyzing. She simply existed, and it was enough. The train crossed a long bridge over a river valley. Beneath it, the darkness opened wide and still, while the tracks carried everyone safely across. A faint wind whispered against the carriage, there for a moment, then gone into the sound of the wheels. On the other side, the land rose into gentle hills. Small houses glowed faintly from within, like tiny sleeping lanterns. A dog barked once, then fell silent. Smoke drifted from a chimney and vanished into the night air. Arthur sipped the last of his tea and set the cup beside him. He closed his eyes just to rest them and found he didn't need to open them again right away. He remembered other journeys long ago, the trips he had taken with his wife when they were young, the way she would lean her head on his shoulder and fall asleep to the rhythm of the wheels. Those memories drifted through his mind, now like clouds passing over a moonlit field, soft and distant, yet somehow still alive. A faint announcement came over the speakers, nomming the next small station. No one reacted much. Leo stayed asleep. Clara shifted slightly. Arthur opened one eye, then closed it again. The train slowed just enough to glide past the platform, where a single attendant stood under a pale lamp, hands in his pockets, watching the cars pass. The station was tiny, surrounded by dark trees and a low fence. A bench sat beneath the sign, empty except for a folded newspaper someone had left behind. The platform looked as if it had been waiting all evening for this one train, and would now return to sleep the moment it left. And leave it did. As the train pulled away, the station lights shrank behind it until they were only a soft glow in the distance. The carriage settled back into its natural hush. Alina closed her book and let her head rest against the seat. feeling her thoughts grow slower, softer, lighter. Maria adjusted the blanket over her child one more time and leaned back. Leo slept on, dreaming perhaps of simple things: a bright lamp, a running dog, a field of flowers, or maybe nothing at all. The train passed through a short tunnel, and for a moment the outside world disappeared completely. Inside, the carriage lights reflected in the windows, a calm golden glow, and the sound of the train deepened into something like distant thunder heard from a place of safety. Then the stars returned, unchanged and patient. For a long while there were no more towns, no more stations, only open land and the road of rails stretching ahead into the dark. The passengers were nearly asleep now, each in their own way. Shoulders relaxed, breathing slowed. Clara watched one last patch of moonlight slide across a field and closed her eyes. Arthur's head had already tilted toward the aisle. Maria's hand rested softly on her son's blanket. Far ahead, the train carried its sleeping passengers toward a place they didn't need to reach quickly. There was no rush, only the journey, the sound of the wheels, and the night unfolding one quiet moment at a time sometime later. The train slowed for another small station, quieter even than the last, its platform empty, its lamp glowing softly through a light mist that had begun to fall. One traveler stood beneath it, holding a small suitcase, looking very tired. He stepped aboard carefully, nodded to Samuel, and found a seat near the back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face carried the calm, thoughtful look of someone who had traveled far and was grateful, finally, to be somewhere warm and still. The doors closed, and the train moved on. He set his suitcase beside him and looked out at the darkness for a while before his gaze drifted down. The softness of the seat, the steady motion, the deep quiet around him. Within minutes his shoulders lowered, his breathing slowed, his eyes closed halfway. Then a little more, outside, tall trees stood like silent guards beside the tracks, their tops touched by moonlight, their trunks left in shadow. A narrow stream appeared beneath a short bridge, its surface catching broken silver from the sky, a few reeds leaning gently with the breeze. The train's reflection shimmered across the water and slipped away behind the wheels, a small, passing beauty, like a thought that comes and goes before it can fully wake you. The countryside gave way to a cluster of cottages, dark windows, and quiet chimneys under the moon. A garden wall, a row of roses bending softly in the night air, a single porch light glowing by a door. The train didn't stop here. It only passed through, gentle as a breeze, and the last feeling of effort seemed to fade with the little town behind it. The seats felt deeper now. The lights felt warmer. The sound of the wheels felt less like machinery and more like a heartbeat below the floor. Arthur smiled in his sleep. Leo shifted once, then settled. Clara's breathing grew so quiet it was almost impossible to hear. And the new passenger, who had only just boarded, had already drifted into the first soft edge of dreams. The train climbed into higher ground, where the air felt clearer, and the moon seemed to hang closer, as if the hills themselves had lifted it nearer to the windows. Long grasses swayed along the slopes. In the distance, A row of hills rose against the sky, smooth and rounded, like sleeping backs beneath a blanket of stars. A light rain began to touch the windows, not a storm, just a gentle sprinkling that sounded almost like fingers tapping softly on glass. The drops caught the moonlight in thin, shining lines before sliding away. Rain on a train at midnight carries its own particular peace. It wraps the carriage in a soft shell of sound and pulls the night even further away. Maria listened to it and thought of home not with longing, but with peace. Home would still be there when she arrived, waiting quietly, the way warm rooms wait after a long journey. For now, there was only the motion of the train, the hush of the rain, and the deep, easy feeling of being carried through the dark. One last small station slipped by, its platform empty, its bench wet with rain, its lamp glowing softly through the mist. No one boarded. No one left. The train slowed, almost like a breath, and moved on again into the open night. By now, nearly everyone had surrendered fully to sleep. Heads rested against windows or seat backs. Hands lay loose in laps. Faces had gone calm and unguarded. The new passenger's dream drifted from the rain to the fields, to a long road lined with trees, and then to nothing at all, quieter and quieter, until even that faded into warmth. The train passed through one final tunnel of stone, and the rain's tapping turned into a soft echo. The lights inside glowed briefly against the glass, a calm golden tunnel within the tunnel, and then the world opened again. Moonlight spreading gently across the wet and glistening land. Somewhere far ahead, morning waited its turn, but not yet. The night deepened further as the train pressed on through the darkness, and with each passing mile, the world outside grew more distant, more dreamlike, more like a landscape remembered rather than seen. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the roof of the carriage, a soothing rhythm that matched the steady heartbeat of the wheels below. Clara had not truly slept yet, but she had entered that soft borderland where thoughts drift like leaves on still water, where time loses its sharp edges, where the mind wanders freely through memories and dreams without quite letting go of the present. She watched the rain streak across the glass in silver threads, each drop catching the pale light before sliding away into the darkness. The fields beyond had become indistinct now, mere suggestions of shape and shadow, rolling gently beneath the weight of the night. In her mind, she began to piece together fragments of the journey that had brought her here. She had left behind a city that never seemed to sleep, a life filled with noise and haste and the constant press of obligations. She had boarded this train with no clear destination in mind, only a deep, aching need for stillness, for a space where time moved differently, where she could simply exist without having to prove anything to anyone. Her husband had called her foolish. Her colleagues had expressed concern. But she had known, with a certainty that surprised her, that this journey was necessary. Something in her needed to be restored, and she had sensed that the train could be the means of that restoration. The tracks curved again, and through the rain-streaked window, Clara caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch, a field of wildflowers, their pale blooms catching the moonlight like scattered pearls. They were gone in an instant, replaced by darkness, but the image lingered in her mind like a promise. She thought about how life was like that, full of fleeting moments of beauty that appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly. The trick, she realized, was to notice them, to hold them in the heart for a moment before letting them go. Arthur had woken briefly, his eyes opening to the soft light of the carriage, his mind still drifting through the landscapes of memory. He thought about the students he had taught over the years, the hundreds of young faces that had passed through his classroom. He wondered what had become of them, whether any of them remembered the old teacher who had tried to instill in them a love of learning, a respect for the written word. He had not been a remarkable teacher, not in the way of those whose names were remembered in school histories, but he had been present, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the quiet consistency of his presence had mattered more than any moment of brilliance. The train continued its journey through the hills, and the rain began to ease, the clouds thinning to reveal patches of star-scattered sky. The moon had moved lower now, casting longer shadows across the landscape, and the world outside seemed to have taken on a deeper, more profound stillness. It was the hour when even the nocturnal creatures had settled into rest, when the earth itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first hint of dawn. Alina stirred in her sleep, a small sound escaping her lips, and for a moment her dreams took on a more vivid quality. She was walking through a library, vast and ancient, the shelves stretching upward into shadow. Books surrounded her, their spines gleaming in the dim light, and she felt a sense of wonder so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been seeking. She realized not knowledge, not achievement, but the simple joy of discovery, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. The dream faded, leaving behind a warmth that lingered even as she slipped back into deeper sleep. The new passenger, the tired man who had boarded at the Misty station, had not moved in hours. His face had relaxed completely, the tension that had marked his features now replaced by a look of profound peace. He had been running from something, or perhaps toward something. It was hard to tell which. What mattered was that on this train, in this moment, he had found a respite from whatever had been chasing him. The steady rhythm of the wheels had become a lullaby, and he had surrendered to it completely. The train passed through another small station, this one no more than a platform and a shelter, its lamp casting a pool of golden light onto the wet ground. No one waited there, and the train slowed only slightly before continuing on its way. It was the kind of station that existed only for those who knew it was there, a secret place for secret journeys. Clara opened her eyes as the train passed the station, catching a glimpse of the name on the sign, a name she didn't recognize, a place she had never heard of. She felt a sudden surge of gratitude for the anonymity of travel, for the freedom of moving through landscapes that held no memories, no associations. There was something liberating about being nowhere, about existing in the space between destinations, belonging to nothing, but the journey itself. She looked around the carriage at her fellow passengers, each one wrapped in their own private cocoon of sleep. They had become a kind of family, she realized, a temporary community bound together by the shared experience of the night. They would never see each other again, most of them, and yet for this brief span of hours, they had been connected in a way that transcended words. They had shared the same silence, the same motion, the same drift toward the edges of sleep. The train climbed higher, and the air inside the carriage grew cooler, the windows misting slightly with the change in temperature. Clara watched the condensation form on the glass, little droplets that caught the light and glowed like tiny jewels. She reached out and touched one, feeling its coolness on her fingertip, and smiled at the simple pleasure of the sensation. Arthur opened his eyes again, more fully this time, and looked out at the landscape that was beginning to emerge from the darkness. The hills had become mountains, their slopes dark with forest, their peaks still hidden in shadow. He recognized the landscape, though he couldn't say from where, perhaps from a book he had read or a picture he had once seen. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling of familiarity, the sense that he had been here before, even if only in his imagination. The train slowed again, this time with a more deliberate purpose, and the passengers stirred in their seats, roused by the change in rhythm. Clara sat up, her hand going to her bag, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. Arthur straightened his shoulders, his hand moving to his pocket where his ticket rested. Alina blinked, her book slipping from her lap, her expression shifting from dreamy to alert. Maria gently shook Leo awake, her voice soft and reassuring. The tired man remained still, lost in a dream that showed no signs of ending. The train pulled into a station that was different from the others, larger, brighter, with more lights and more people. It was clearly a stopping point, a place where passengers would disembark and others would board. The platform was busy even at this early hour, with travelers waiting with suitcases and sleepy children, with the quiet efficiency of those who had mastered the art of moving through the world. Clara watched them through the window, feeling a strange sense of separation. She was still on the train, still part of the journey, while they were about to begin theirs. The transition from inside to outside, from the stillness of the carriage to the bustle of the station, seemed like a crossing from one world to another. The door,